Hello and welcome to Media Nama's interview with Nishtal Shetty, co-founder and CEO of WazirX. WazirX is a cryptocurrency exchange based out of India. It's one of the largest cryptocurrencies exchanges in the country. Last year, took, uh, when the RBI circular was removed by the Supreme Court in its verdict in March 2020, the platform, along with its other competitors, saw massive growth in the user base. In fact, all cryptocurrency exchanges in India have seen a massive growth in trading volume by about 500% between March and December. So we have Nishchal with us. Thanks very much for joining us, Nishchal. So let's go back to when you started and when you started the company and how the RBI circular kind of impacted the industry as a whole.
Sure. We started WazirX in 2018, and this was around March. And about 3 weeks into our launch, I remember that the RBI circular came in, and the circular gave all the banks 3 months to comply with it. And the ask in the circular was that you should stop dealing with all the crypto related businesses. So here we were just about 3 weeks old, and this do or die situation for us. We decided that we are in this for the long term, and since it was not illegal, the major point here was that the circular was meant for banks. It was not meant for the people of India, or it was not meant to ban trading of cryptocurrencies. So it was just going to be difficult. We knew to do business, but not impossible. So with that mindset, we launched and we went ahead and we built what now is very popular is a peer-to-peer way for people to buy and sell. So that WazirX P2P became like I would say, the center point of the entire crypto ecosystem, where people said that despite a banking ban in India, you could still trade in cryptocurrencies, and the only way to do that was WazirX P2P. So that gave us that push, being a new player. I think I often say when I look back, it was sort of an adversity that we converted into an opportunity. Though I wouldn't pray for an adversity like that in an industry, but I think we did what we could, the best of that. This was just the initial days, and then later on, which we'll talk as we move ahead, was I launched this campaign, India Wants Crypto, in the same year, in November 2018, and the objective was, for me and a lot of entrepreneurs, we come from a background of just building products, and everything else is sorted. If you see legal regulations, everything, but here is an industry where only building a product is not going to be enough. You need to work on the regulatory aspect, because it's new. It's new for us. It's new for the government and everyone. And I said, while the industry can work, we should also involve everyone who's part of it. And that meant all the millions of people who are trading in cryptocurrencies, holding it, or doing anything related to crypto. With that intention, I launched India Wants Crypto, and the objective was, if we as a community get together, then we can have one large voice that our lawmakers will listen to, and probably regulate it in the right way. So it's been going on over 800 days now, and I continue to do that, and I'll do it till we get positive regulations in India.
So why don't you just explain sort of the P2P model versus what the a regular trading model that any let's say brokerage would do, which is a payment gateway model, and
Right.
sort of kind of if you could illustrate on what was the model prior to the ban, what was the model after the circular came in, how did
Sure.
things change, what were bankers saying before the
Yeah.
circular, after the circular?
So see, before the ban and even now after the ban was lifted, the model that we follow is where when you want to buy your first Bitcoin, you have, let's say, 1,000 rupees. So you transfer that 1,000 rupees to WazirX's bank account, and WazirX will give you 1,000 rupees credit in our wallet. Then using that credit, you can buy Bitcoin on WazirX, and instantly the Bitcoin is in it's moved to your wallet, and you own your first Bitcoin. Now, when the circular came, the problem was WazirX would not have a bank account. So the problem here was you cannot transfer the INR to WazirX. So that cuts you off from buying your crypto. What we said was, when you do this buy and sell, on the other side, while you were buying, some other person like you is selling their Bitcoin, and they're getting cash in return, INR. So how about us becoming just a sort of an escrow account for the cryptocurrencies, because that was not illegal to do. And instead of you as a buyer sending the money to WazirX, how about asking you to send the money directly to the seller? So that became like the change that we did, and it worked beautifully. And this whole transaction, we had achieved a speed of about, I think, within 5 minutes it got done, because UPI has made it really easy for people to send money to each other. So when you send the money, you send it directly to the seller, and we transfer the cryptocurrency from the seller to you. So it was a beautiful three-party system. And yeah, that was P2P. Now, but again, it's now you can directly transfer to our bank account, because after the Supreme Court verdict, we have a bank account backs now.
That I have is it, would that qualify as a prepaid instrument, because it's essentially a wallet, right? And if I'm giving if I'm transferring 1,000 rupees from my account to WazirX's escrow, and then WazirX gives me 1,000 rupees in a wallet, that's the same model that any digital currency wallet currently functions. So, and they would qualify as PPIs. So
yeah, so in this case, you're just transferring the money and buying it from someone else, and we are just a platform. We don't buy or sell or do anything, and you don't transfer this money directly to someone. You're buying crypto in return for that. So it's a fairly straightforward buy and sell model.
Okay, because the wallet has to be used only for one purpose rather than purpose.
Yeah, it's not used for payments or to other purposes.
Okay, but just in terms of the payment gateways now, were the payment gateways sort of hesitant to allow you to do this, or are they sort of open to giving you the channels for UPI or IMPS or NEFT? Any of the?
I think yeah. Now throughout the industry, it's sort of not everyone, but selectively some are working with the industry, and some are in the process of working. But I think collectively, the feelers I've got after the banking ban was lifted was, if there's nothing stopping them, nobody wants to stay away. Because if you see globally also, for example, a lot of banks in the US, they were very negative, and now they're all behind the crypto industry, because that's a large part of their business now. It's a huge part of their business. So nobody wants to leave and lose out on this business opportunity. So even in India, I'm seeing that shift happening, where all the payment gateways now want to work with exchanges. And I think in a couple of years, maybe it will be the new normal, I guess, working with crypto exchanges.
So in March last year, the Supreme Court essentially took down the RBI circular, saying it was disproportionate, that the RBI could have taken other steps, but this is, you're essentially shutting down businesses. So how have things changed post that? What are bankers saying post that? What are payment companies saying? I'm sure the financial industry, when we talk of VC funding, has that all opened up to you all? And obviously, we'll get to what's happening this week, but.
Absolutely. I think, the timing of the whole Supreme Court verdict was very interesting, because just a few weeks after that, it was 4th of March, 2020, when the verdict came. And about 24th of March, I think we went into a lockdown in India. The whole pandemic situation occurred. And as soon as the verdict came, we saw a bump in our traffic. As soon as Supreme Court said you are allowed, everyone who was into crypto and was staying away, they all jumped back. But the pandemic sort of, I would say, expedited the number of people coming in, grew it even larger. But these were new people. And when we looked into what was happening, was that these were people who were affected by the whole lockdown, either losing job or having more time on your hand because you're sitting at home. You save time traveling and just going out. So all of these people also started getting onto crypto. So sort of snowballed, the whole Supreme Court verdict and the lockdown, which is what you see the whole 500% increase in trading volumes and signups that you're talking about. It was a result of these two. Then there was a third macro factor, which was globally the price of Bitcoin was really shooting up. The whole of 2020 was a great year, and 2021 seems to be even better for whoever invested in Bitcoin. And that again gave a large impetus. Now, in the side of banks, what was happening is, see, ultimately for payment gateways and banks, all that matters is how big a business it is. And here they were seeing that rapidly month on month, the businesses were growing in the crypto ecosystem. So they all started having discussions to understand how they can help. And but I think the first few months, it was a little chaotic because they themselves were going into a lockdown preparation, and they were not aware about the Supreme Court verdict. Now seems to be all the banks are aware that they can participate with the crypto industry. So I think now it's opening up even more in 2021.
So beyond deposit services, are banks giving loans to you all? I mean, to the industry, not specifically.
No, so I nothing I'm aware of, and I don't think because startups, you can raise money. You don't need to get a loan. I think raising money is easier that way.
I think being a startup with debt is a bad idea anyway.
Yeah.
So, one of the biggest concerns that regulators across the world, and I think India still is concerned about it, although there are some examples of how the industry worldwide has evolved, right? Whether it's the US, Singapore, Japan, even the EU, for instance. Uh, it's to do with terrorism financing, KYC, AML. So I understand that the majority of major exchanges in India, the Indian-based exchanges, are using KYC, AML. So, you know, if you're kind of following the same thing that an NBFC or a fintech lender or a payments company is following in terms of KYC for your customer, um, is there any further steps you need to take that you think the government is concerned about? Because as far as I know, all of y'all are using similar softwares to
Right.
do KYC checks or AML checks.
Right. No, that's absolutely correct, which is why the entry point, I would say, is on par with the banking industry or any other financial. I think the point of contention comes from what happens after you have bought the cryptocurrency. You can withdraw it to any wallet. Now, that is beyond our control or anyone else's control. And I think this is where the fear comes. And this is probably but a solvable way. There are a few solvable way, difficult but solvable. For example, in the EU, that you must have heard of this whole travel rule that they're talking about, where they say that if you're going to withdraw it from an exchange in any of the EU regions, you need to the exchange needs to pull in the KYC from the wallet where they're going to transfer. So what happens then is you make sure that you're transferring for legitimate purposes to legitimate accounts and not to some random accounts. So I think if India can go in that direction, it's hard to implement, but I think there is a solution rather than worrying about that aspect and thinking that we should ban it, because banning anyways won't prevent you from transferring it outside. But I think regulating it will probably help. But yeah, it's that part, the exit
So I
part.
think that's interesting because that's sort of like an account aggregator idea, right? Like
Yeah,
I can pull information from another institution in case that institution has my KYC information.
right,
But
exactly.
I think the problem for the government here or other governments is that cryptocurrency is global, right? So we can't control the prices. So if you looked at this whole Robinhood episode, what people were saying, GameStop and Robinhood, was that at the end of the day, the establishment financial institutions could invoke the circuit breakers, could invoke many rules that's for stock exchanges, but in the case of
Right.
Bitcoin, you're not, or any cryptocurrency, you can't do that. It's a 24-hour live trading instrument. So, do you think that is the concern, that maybe technologically we don't understand it? That how do you regulate something that's global? I mean, there's no single regulator for it. There is no country that owns it. So is that also a concern that you think that? How do you address that?
See, I think there will definitely be concerns on whatever new emerges, where your control reduces. But then that's the same as your news media versus the online blogging platform where there is no checks, and there will always be I would say side effects of that. But we should look at the part where there's an opportunity. There's a larger opportunity for India to eat a large part of this new business that emerges. Now, if we are concerned about those negative use cases, the one choice which seems to be in the talks in the government now is ban, which means to protect, let's say, $1 billion, you're going to let go of a $100 billion opportunity. Now, that's, I think, a decision that we as a country should take. And if you look at globally what is happening, every country understands there are problems, but no one is banning it. There is a reason for that, because there's a larger pie to be eaten into. So I think we can do things that will make sure that these illegal or I would say the wrong approaches that some of the bad actors take, that can be kept in check while we eat a larger part of the good pie that exists, in which is I think it's easily the value of cryptocurrency today has crossed $1 trillion. India could easily eat in 10-20% of that, and that's great for our economy. So I think we should look at that. How do we eat into that whole large pie that exists, rather than being worried about if we get into that, there will be some edge cases. I think we can handle it. It's not that difficult.
So you think that we're focusing too much on the side effects rather than the pie that's in front of us?
Yeah, exactly.
So like you said, 2020 was the anomaly year. I think we're all the same generation. I think it's an anomaly year, but it's also the year that fintech became huge, a mainstream thing in India, and I think cryptocurrencies became a mainstream thing in the world. So you've seen MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, Square, a lot of companies start buying into cryptos and also build products on top of it. Do you think that the whole idea that cryptocurrency is this anonymous, decentralized, anti-establishment financial system, is that over now? Because if the establishment multinational corporations are now buying into it, I did a story yesterday where Elon Musk bought $1.5 billion worth of bitcoins, and together with that, corporations own about 10% of Bitcoin's market cap, sorry. So, is the crypto definition as it was defined in that white paper, is that gone now today?
See, I think it's evolution. The internet was built for defense, back in the day, and today the common man uses it, and that's how it is with crypto. The initial thought process behind it definitely was something that's not under the control of the government. But I think the second part of what Satoshi's vision was, I think, which is intact today, is a permissionless ecosystem. And that I think is it's more about freedom and democracy rather than fighting the establishment, because ultimately our governments, we have a democratic government, we vote for it, it's not put on us. So I think that way, if I look at it, that's the part of the original vision is still true. And I think that's the beautiful part, which is like I, as a software developer in India, don't have to take someone's permission in the US to be part of this. If you look at the traditional system, it's so much of permissions that unless you know someone really deep into a company, you can't get access to their APIs. But in the case of, let's say, crypto, it does not matter what part of the world you are. You have access. You can be an entrepreneur. You can be whatever you want on this ecosystem. So I think that is still intact, and that is where countries like India, I believe, see, we don't realize, but India still does not have an upper hand in the traditional financial system. We are sort of, there are US companies, they eat a large part of this. But in crypto, we have an equal chance of fighting and being one of the top players. And I believe we should take that opportunity as a country instead of, worrying that something wrong will happen. I think we have an opportunity to be one of the top players.
So you think crypto can aid the fintechs in ensuring that formal credit access increases in India?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also breaking down geographic barriers that Indian companies have today. Today, you have to only service the ecosystem here in India. If you can open up through crypto, you can reach the world. I think Indian companies can now, it's probably the time to start increasing our appetite for success as well, and appetite for market share, and look global. You might be seeing a lot of global talk is happening on how Indian companies can serve the global market. And crypto can be one of that method for even our traditional fintech, saying, okay, if the regular route is going to be full of Visas and MasterCards, but how can one of the traditional fintech players in India eat into the global market share? I think crypto can be that path for them as well.
So just in terms of this payment acceptance, right, which is on the consumer side, MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, even Tesla now is going to accept Bitcoins as payment and also issue crypto cards, essentially. Do you think that's a possibility in India for companies like y'all to get into that? Obviously, depending on regulation, but do you think that there is an acceptance infrastructure? Is that required as an acceptance infrastructure?
So yeah, I think at the intra, like the national level, I don't believe so, because I'm a big fan of UPI and what the RBI has done. I think it's beautiful. No other country has done it, so kudos to us. But this is where I'm talking about the technique, like the innovation that India is doing. But the problem that exists today, and where I think crypto can come, is remittance. Indians lose about 7 to 10% in remittance fees alone by bringing it from there to India. If we change that and say Bitcoin is one of those ramps for you to bring money in, then that's an instant transfer without any slippage. And I think that's at $100-200 billion remittance that comes in, you're losing $10-20 billion to other companies. That can go into the pockets of our people. People need it. And I think this is where crypto comes in really beautifully. Remittances is one of the large use cases. So I think these are the kind of use cases that will emerge in India rather than local payments, which is free and instant. I don't know what you can do beyond it. Maybe I'm not seeing it, but in remittance, I definitely see.
Okay. So, as crypto's gone big, as Bitcoin prices have gone off the charts now, the last time we saw this was in 2017 and then it crashed. Now it doesn't seem like it's ever going to crash. But at the same time, all central banks are now gung-ho about digital currencies. Now, some central banks are saying this is their central bank backed digital currencies are going to be competitors to crypto, or that it will kill the crypto industry. I'm not sure whether these can even qualify as crypto assets, right? Because even in China, for instance, which is the most China or the Bahamas, which are the two at the front end of this development, they're essentially digital wallets and currencies issued on a separate ledger by the central bank. So, what are your thoughts on CBDCs? Are they the crypto killer?
See, they're not the crypto killer. I think simply because the use cases are different. And though I believe that CBDC is going to be good if it's really on a blockchain. And what happens with that is the biggest change is going to be a settlement time. Today, there's if your money is stuck in let's say a transaction, it might take from anywhere from 1 2 hours to I think 7 days wait for that money to get back into your account. But with CBDC, your settlement is instant. So that's going to be beautiful, and that will also give rise to a lot of innovation in the sector. But like I said, Bitcoin, for example, it's seen as an asset class. It's not even a currency. So getting the INR, digital INR, and saying that okay, now you don't need Bitcoin is actually, it's just I think there's a lack of understanding, and once that comes, I tell people a lot. Let's say Bitcoin is needed on the Bitcoin blockchain. Ethereum, for example, you need Ethereum on the Ethereum blockchain. Now, let's say as a software developer, if I want to run a piece of code on Ethereum, I cannot go to some company there and say, please accept INR, because there is no company A. Second is Ether is the only way you can run software on Ethereum blockchain. So each blockchain has its own use cases. In a way, when I hear these I would say like INR can be the Bitcoin killer. It's more like saying Facebook can beat Google or Google search, but those are two different products with different use cases, and that's how these I think CBDC versus Bitcoin talk is also. I think eventually we'll all understand it, but right now there's a period of confusion.
But do you think the CBDC is meant for sort of, it would be better for institutional settlements and payments? So rather than you and me buying and selling things in a digital rupee, it would make sense for banks and corporations to settle their payments in a digital rupee. Do you think a
Yeah.
wholesale versus a retail wholesale is better than a retail CBDC?
Yeah, and I think if there's an implementation path, if you look at one going to B2C, which is retail first, versus going to the whole B2B approach, I would personally think of an institutional approach first, because you can make that efficient. The whole institutions talking to each other by sending value towards. Right now, today they all have to keep their own ledger and do all of these reconciliation that happens all the time. You can eliminate all of that. So you first make your institutions really, I would say, quick, and make it very easy for them to settle between each other using your CBDC. And then maybe you can trickle down to the rest of the, because Indians, honestly, UPI is so amazing. You don't need anything right now. But if our banks can talk to each other quickly, instantly settle, I think that's going to make the banking system in India far more efficient.
But it would have to be on a blockchain, because a wallet
it has to.
rupee is not a crypto, right?
No, that's not going to happen. It has to be a blockchain. It has to be permissionless so that we can all read into it. Then the kind of startups you will see being built on top of it, we can't even imagine. I think if you have the idea, I would just start it. You can do so much more on that.
So let's go to regulations. I think the last 10 days there's been too much news about what the government plans to do. We still aren't very clear about what the government plans to do, but essentially the government has decided that it will introduce a cryptocurrency banning bill, while at the same time it will give the RBI the legal power to create a digital rupee. That's as far as the limited information that we have from government documents and a few statements by the finance minister yesterday. What do you think of this announcement? Do you think that this is a rehash of your nightmares coming back?
So I think, there's never a dull day in crypto. It's either going up or down. Crypto is never normal. So these things have you get used to it. But I think this one is sort of significant because it has reached at least the parliament. as against previously where it's been more about just stock and there's been a draft bill. This time it's reached the parliament. But I see this as a great move forward for India, where at least the government has taken the initiative to get into that path of regulation. Now, while we fear that there will be a ban and everything, I think this is how it starts. You start with something. Either there's a 50% chance it might have been a positive start or a negative start, and that's okay. But there is now a path towards a bill, and I believe that path would be in first is getting in touch with the industry players to understand. I'm sure they want some data from us, some understanding from us. So that hasn't happened, which is why it does not bother me too much that there's a bill, because I think the next will be the bill should ideally be going to a standing committee and then have deeper discussions with the industry players and find the right way to regulate this. And I think that will happen. And this first impression is that it's been built with only. So if you look at even the draft bill, you realize it's a regulator-driven approach. Regulator-driven approach is not about innovation or growth. It's about how to minimize negative impact, and that's fine. But a country like India cannot just think about how to minimize negative impact. We also have to see how to maximize the positive impact. So I'm sure our government, our leaders are going to now look at that aspect. So this aspect is done. Now the maximization aspect will come in, and then we'll have a proper bill, I guess, in the country.
Yeah, I think we'd have to first see what the bill is saying and then figure out what the contours of, I mean, how the bill defines private cryptocurrencies, because I have written this before that there is nothing called private cryptocurrency. It's not owned
See,
by
that's,
any
yeah. So that also, you realize when you read terms like that there's been zero industry participation, because you ask anyone who understands crypto, the first thing they'll tell is what you said. There is no such thing as a private cryptocurrency. So I think that's where the industry participation and everything, it's yet to happen.
Okay. So, okay, your point is that India is at least now on the path to definitely regulating it, whether it's a ban or not a ban, or we'll see some contours of that bill come out in the next few months, in the next few weeks and months. So, regulations worldwide are very different, right? Which is, again, I think, which is also a problem, because as we said before, crypto is a global phenomenon and it's a global product and it's a global platform. So no one regulator has jurisdiction over it, right? So in the US, for instance, the Securities and Exchange Commission regulates it, whereas in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore regulates it. What do you think of these approaches? I know because Singapore's Bitcoin is accepted as a payment instrument,
Right.
therefore the central bank regulates it. What do you think of these two different approaches? And India can have also a differing path, right? You can have separate regulators for separate use cases.
But I think so. In the US, the SEC comes in only when they see something as a security. So they still have a demarcation saying only when it falls into a particular regulator will that regulator step in. And I think that's a beautiful approach, because in India also we have a currency regulator, a securities regulator. UK also sort of does that. What they've said is they wanted to classify. They've classified if there is a security, then the security regulator. If it's a currency, then the central bank. So I think that approach we could take. Though I feel that that's a lot to start with. So right now, looking at the situation, since the RBI came up with a circular, I think maybe the RBI could start with some approach where your whatever banking KYC, AML that we were talking about, maybe they could just start with those guidelines for the industry, and then maybe more regulators can come in. So I believe, looking at the situation today, that the RBI is going to step in as a regulator for crypto in India. At least that's how it looks from the outside. And then maybe we'll have more regulators. But yeah, there's no one regulator today anywhere in the world who can say that cryptocurrencies fall under us. That's also, I think, Mr. Anurag Thakur yesterday in the parliament said the same thing, that due to the nature of cryptocurrency, none of the existing regulators are in a position to regulate. So I'm guessing that the government of India will probably give some powers to one of the regulators. Seems to be RBI right now, but I think only time will tell.
But just in terms of regulations, when you're looking at cryptocurrencies, we're still talking about the product, and then there are the intermediaries, which is you as the exchange. It could be a trading platform, it could just be a payment instrument company. So companies would have to be regulated differently. I just wanted to get your thoughts on an exchange like, crypto is only going to go upwards from here in terms of acceptance. The prices might fluctuate, but ultimately, as an exchange, do you think like a couple of years from now, we'd have things like a liquidity rule for you, capital position rules for you. I'm just going back to this Robinhood example because the whole crisis in Robinhood, regardless of what the speculation is, why they did what they did in the GameStop scenario, essentially Robinhood faced a liquidity crisis. Right? There were too many orders that they had to fulfill. So, do you think those are the kind of rules that you'll see coming in, far into the future once we start actually regulating crypto exchanges separate from payment companies, separate from miners?
Yeah, I think there's also due to the technology of the whole way this blockchain works. Uh, in the what happens in your traditional securities exchanges is there's a settlement period, and in between that period is where all of these issues arise. In the case of a crypto exchange, 100% liquidity should be the expectation. And like if your users own 100 bitcoins, you should have all of that 100 at any point in time with you. So as again, let's say your brokers may not always have that because of at the settlement period of, I don't know, whatever number of hours or days. So that's where this liquidity crunch and everything happens. In India, I don't think but eventually you'll have to come up with these rules, and I think that will happen eventually. But it's too early right now to even worry about it. And the thing is, you can pull in from the global liquidity very, very easily. So in India, whenever you see a demand upping in demand, you also see a lot of sellers coming in by bringing in liquidity. So liquidity does not seem to be like a large problem right now. I don't think that kind of a scenario would emerge out here in
Has there ever
crypto.
been an issue with the cryptocurrency, undercapitalized, some issue that they, because I know Bitcoin trading is one-on-one, right? You're buying and selling, and it's not
Yeah.
traditional brokerages, stock exchanges where there's margins, where there's, you put a certain amount of collateral up, and then only once the trade has to be settled, you have to put the full money up. I know
Right.
that doesn't currently exist, but have there ever been crypto exchanges that have failed because of this, other than hacking issues?
um, Yeah, see, hacking has been the one of the largest reason why exchanges where they lose user funds. Liquidity wise, I don't think nothing that I can think of where there's been a liquidity crunch because, like I said, yeah, the settlement is instant. You always have a 1:1. There are also exchanges internationally now providing margin and futures and stuff. What they usually do is they have sort of an insurance fund where if something goes wrong, then they will reimburse you from their insurance in terms of liquidity crisis. But yeah, so also liquidity, see, I'm talking about Bitcoin because Bitcoin has the highest liquidity. Other newer tokens might face a liquidity crunch at times, depending on the demand and supply. Though that might happen at times.
But that might need some sort of convertibility or some rules to allow that.
Yeah,
If you have extra Bitcoins, how do I get the
something else.
less popular Bitcoins liquidity, right?
Right, right.
So I wanted to ask you a question on mining, right? So there was a US intelligence chief who wrote to Jerome Powell, the former Federal Reserve chairman, sometime in November, December last year, saying that Bitcoin is a threat to national security. And I think that argument also you will see that argument come up whenever the cryptocurrency bill comes to India. So in that letter, he said about 70 to 80% of Ether and Bitcoin is mined in China. Do you think India should get onto that mining industry as well? Because okay, trading is one thing, but someone's got to process all of these blocks, right? Do you think India is lagging behind on the mining thing, and that becomes an issue?
I definitely think India should participate, and it's not just about let's say mining and making money, but it's also about understanding the technology. Participation is always the first step to understand what this is all about. And I think on a country level, I think we should definitely look at mining as a one of the industries, and probably subsidize it and make sure that we do have Bitcoin miners in India as well, large Bitcoin miners. I'm sure we do have them, but I think it's still a very nascent industry in India right now. So I would definitely love to see the government push in that. See, it's not always about initial profitability, but as a country, can we develop the skill sets and can we develop an industry around this? Because that leads to more jobs, more the economy grows that way. And you're talking about China. That's what China has a large economy. So while mining started, some of the great things that have emerged in China as a result is large companies that are selling mining software, mining hardware, and that I'm talking about is where India could eventually go to. But for that, you need to start and push this in the right direction.
That could tie into component manufacturing also
Yeah.
in a way, right?
And we are pushing to be a manufacturing hub eventually if we want to. So I think this is one more. And the thing is, the competition out here is lesser compared to your traditionally set industries where every country is competing.
Yeah.
Out here, I think you can leapfrog faster.
Right. So the Ministry of Electronics and IT came out with a national strategy on blockchain a few weeks ago. So the document is actually very limited to government public use cases. It doesn't really touch upon private use cases all that much. It mentions a few projects, but actually doesn't go into detail into what the private sector, at least what the banks are doing with R3 or Coda, and what the insurance companies have been trying for the past few years with blockchain. What do you think are the larger use cases of blockchain, and the fact that the report doesn't mention cryptocurrency in it as a use case?
See, I think if you look, yeah, I think that has been more B2B. Without it, really, most of that does not affect the common man in India. It does not help them participate in this whole thing. It seems to be more of a technology choice that a few companies are going to make. I don't think that's going to be our entire strategy as a country. We need to include these public blockchains. Those are all private, so those are real private blockchains. It's like you have an intranet strategy. You don't have an internet strategy today, in crypto. And that internet strategy will be the second half of that national blockchain policy. And I believe that is yet to be built out. It's fine. At least we have half of it, half the picture. But the second half will be how do we as a country get into public blockchains and participate and contribute, and maybe someday also launch our own public blockchains out of India, because Indian entrepreneurs are also building a lot of blockchain products. So maybe we could have our own blockchains developed in India, which are public in nature. But I think it is going to take some time. But that should definitely be part of the policy. Public blockchains not existing is half the policy then.
Okay. No, because so the strategy with that they've laid out is that a lot of like digital identities, whether it's driving license, land records. When they say digital identities, I'm guessing they're saying Aadhaar, and a lot of other national health stack. A lot of this can be moved onto blockchain. The question I want to ask you is, at the end of the day, blockchain is firstly costly. It only works at scale. But there's regular systems like an account aggregator framework is an API driven framework. So what do you think of this race between API versus blockchain? Can blockchain replace everything that's on an API today, or do you need to really test and experiment?
No, so the thing is, it's about making a technology choice based on what your need is. If let's say you are the only company in complete control and you're building something, an API is the right approach, because blockchain is going to be expensive and slow. But let's say you want to work with 4 other companies and collaborate and build something. The question is who owns the data, who controls the data? And there you do not have consensus, because each company will say, I want to own the data, I want to control the data. So here what happens is all of you 4 or 5 companies come together and say, let's use this blockchain where all of us will have copies of the data, all of us can write into it, and we have a consensus mechanism between us, which is automated. So that's how the technology choices have to be made. Now, if the government is the only body which is going to provide an API, replacing that with a blockchain is not going to solve anything. It's going to make it less efficient. So it's just about scenarios. What are you building?
So you have to build common IP and common moats, as opposed to retaining your individual IP and individual moat for blockchain.
Right.
So Nishal, my last 2 questions would be, where do you think cryptos go from here? Today, Bitcoin, I think it hit a high of $48,000 yesterday, late last night. And at the end of the day, some people are saying it will hit $100,000 at the end of this year. Do you think Bitcoin is becoming too expensive to be a retail product? Do you think the other cryptocurrencies, like we've seen, as Bitcoin's rising, Ether's rising as well, Ripple also is rising. Do you think other Bitcoins, other cryptocurrencies will get the sort of, the sort of demand that Bitcoin's getting? And How do you see the decentralized finance landscape in India today, and where do you think that goes?
See, I think Bitcoin is seen like digital gold, and there's no replacement to that. So Ethereum has a different use case and different reason. But the first crypto that maximum people know and buy is Bitcoin. So I don't think there's going to be an alternative where you will go for that as against going for Bitcoin. Now, is it expensive? I think this is very subjective. How I look at it is less than 10% of the world today either knows or has owned Bitcoin. And there are only 21 million Bitcoins. So there's another 80-90% of the world to come in. And the same amount of Bitcoin that exists is going to be divided. So I think there's a huge upside still remaining. The time frame is what is very, very hard to say. Is it going to be in the next 3 years, or is it going to be a decade before, let's say, 50% of the world is onboarded to Bitcoin? But I believe that this network, if you look at the last 10 years, the Bitcoin network has only grown, and it will only grow. Very similar to the internet. The internet network has only grown and it will continue to grow. It never shrinks, because once you're on the internet, you're always on the internet. So I think this network will continue to grow. And as more and more people enter the Bitcoin network, the value has to appreciate. That is the only way up. It's a deflationary asset. There's no inflation here. So it has to increase. So if you're looking at a 3 to 5 year time frame, I think any point in time is a good point to buy. But if you're looking at to time it for the next 3 to 6 months, that's going to be hard. Knowing 2017, I wouldn't want to say too much about the short-term fluctuations. It can go any direction, but long-term, I'm a big believer. It will go in the right direction. Now, DeFi, you were talking about. So how I see DeFi is the breaking of geographic barriers to financial products, and DeFi is still in the building stage. So the ultimate aim of DeFi is to have this one global bank where you will get all the services that banking has. Now, what is happening, the stage at which it is there is those banking services are being built. For example, lending in DeFi is being built. Your loans are being, this interest products are being built, savings products are being built. So all of that, it's still in the building block stage. The idea is once that is built up, what will happen is anyone in the world, any entrepreneur or anyone can say, okay, I need these 5 pieces and I have a bank which gives you lending and savings and everything together. And they don't have to build all that. They don't have to build the liquidity, the technology. They just have to pull in these APIs and provide a amazing, beautiful interface to you. So we will have a future where you have these local banks which provide you, whatever services they do today. And then you have global banks which have liquidity, which is global. They have the entire, I would say, the open source community building for them. And then when you see that, you realize what's going to win, what's going to be bigger as an ecosystem. So I think DeFi is something that we do not understand. We cannot comprehend how large it can be, but it's very amazing.
But isn't it's just a theoretical question almost? Aren't neobanks a decentralized financial bank?
So see, the thing is, neobanks, they still have the same underlying infrastructure, which is bound by geography and by a company. One company below building, and then you are building your neobank on top of that. Here, you're talking about an entire open source community, liquidity from anywhere in the world, and no permission to access it. That changes the game. Out here, neobank, I still need permission. I have one company and they have to follow one country's rule. Here, I don't have no rules, global liquidity, global workforce, and even your customer base. A neobank can only service, let's say from India, they only service India. They have to go to each and every country. There's no neobank with more than, I think, 5 or 10 countries, because getting into a new country itself is such a large task. You open a DeFi product, you service all countries in the world on day one. So your market size is so huge when you start.
But for that, you'd have to get into this debate again about regulations. How do you regulate jurisdiction-wise? How do you regulate interest rates? How do you regulate collections? So I guess it's still a long process. I think cryptocurrencies have been around for nearly 10 years now, but it seems like you've got another few more years before there's regulations, there's mainstream acceptance. Nishal, I'd like to thank you so much for your time.